There was plenty going on in round 9 of the candidates tournament, so let's plunge straight in and look at the top game of the day. Vladimir Kramnik with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen, who's leading in the tournament with Aronian. Kramnik played his standard Catalan, and it's interesting to see that Carlsen is not improvising in the opening. He's content to play very solidly. And, well, I'm going to move straight ahead to this position after 22 moves. Kramnik has just played his rook from c4 to a4. White is already better here. I think Kramnik would have been reasonably pleased with his position out of the opening. You can see that black has split pawns on the queen side, so potentially quite weak, and they're already being targeted by white's pieces. And white's pieces are very well coordinated, actually. You know, this queen stands very well on e3, so you can see rook a7 is already a threat. So what should black do about this? Well, it's actually a critical moment in the game. How many players would realise this? I'm not sure. But if black starts to defend passively, then black can be in real trouble. For example, if you just played rook a8, and now there's a beautiful move for white. Everything just clicks after this move, knight e4. Now, just for a moment, black's coordination has been disturbed. You can see there's a loose rook on b7, and knight e4 exploits that. Because, of course, if knight takes, queen takes knight, check, and picks up the rook on b7. So, well, let's say the king moves back, and now white has time to position the piece on c5. So let's play queen c5. Well, that forces an exchange of queens, and you can see that white actually is already doing extremely well. Knight attacks these pieces, these pawns are under fire. Very strong position for white indeed. So this is actually a critical moment in the game, and you know, Carlsen had a bit of a think here and came up with an excellent move. I think, you know, we've already seen in this tournament how well Carlsen is able to defend when he's under pressure. Rook e8, and this maintains a kind of coordination in black's position. Now, one thing is he of course defends the queen, so that means he can, under the right circumstances, offer an exchange of queens. But the other thing that he might do is play pawn to c6 to guard along the 7th rank, and then perhaps use the d5 square as well. In any case, white doesn't really have anything better than to take the pawn on a7. Well, why not? So white is now a clear pawn up, but just for a moment that actually disturbs white's coordination of his pieces. And Carlsen had prepared this move, queen b4, that he flashed out very quickly. So you can see the queen is a bit offside on a7. The knight doesn't have support. That's very important. So black is just disturbing white's pieces here. Now, this is not fatal. White is still a bit better in this position, but black has just enough play to hold the balance. For example, if queen d4 looks like a sensible move to bring the queen back into the centre. c5 is a good move. Well, if the queens are exchanged, then a2 is going to fall. So, okay, the queen goes back. Now, let's just say if black waits, black improves the position of the king. It's very hard for white to do anything here, actually. The queen stands excellently. If the rook moves, then, well, perhaps the queen comes to c4, maybe even queen d4 check. But black is solid enough here. Black is active enough. White must always be very careful about his king, of course, because there are weak light squares here. Well, indeed, this diagonal is open too. So it's going to be very difficult to advance through the centre here. Should be okay for black. Kramnik chose bishop e5, and Carlsen had prepared another really excellent move, knight d5. And again, that disturbs the coordination. There's a tactical point behind this. If, well, knight takes was played, bishop takes, and now if rook takes d5, then you check on e1, and of course you can pick up bishop on e5. There's a double attack. So queen takes c7 was played, but after queen c4, well, they're just trading down into an endgame. Although white is 2 pawns up, he can't hold everything together. There are too many pieces on pre. So the game went like this, and well, Carlsen drew this endgame very, very easy. It's going to be impossible for white to do anything while the king is cut on the 7th, and opposite coloured bishops make it impossible to advance this pawn. The rook can always come here, well, and so on. Black draws very, very easily. So just for a moment it looked a little bit dicey for Carlsen, but he defended very accurately indeed. Now, while this was going on, there was a really wild game in progress. Svidler against Grischuk. Now, this is so complicated, I haven't got time to go through it all, but I'm going to join the game at this moment. You can see there's a strange material balance. You can also see that white's king has very little pawn cover. So in this position, white has 3 minor pieces for a queen. Black's king has a little bit of protection with pawns. It's very interesting here. Svidler just played rook g2. Very interesting to see that he didn't actually want to take the rook on f8. Somehow the 2 bishops look really powerful, but once one of them goes, then it's much easier for the queen to counterattack the king, and it also means the king is much safer on g7. Let's look at what happened in the game. Rook g2, okay, defending here and also preparing to cover the king if necessary. Rook d8. Now, bishop d4 check is certainly not a bad move. Svidler played rook d4, which is actually a very ambitious move indeed. And now rook f4. I think his idea is he now wants to play bishop d4 check, knock the king back, and in some cases perhaps bring the rook up to the h-file to try to attack the king. That's one idea. But Grischuk reacted very well here. He played d4, and after Svidler took, he was desperate to get one of those bishops. And now suddenly the king is relatively safe, protected by these pawns. White's king doesn't look so healthy once one of those bishops has gone. And, well, naturally in such a wild game as this, both players were running short of time. And this is a very tricky decision for white to defend, even though white has well, you could say a kind of material advantage of rook and 2 minor pieces against the queen. In fact, I think this is much easier for black to play than white, particularly, yeah, with the exposed king. Svidler played a4 to protect the bishop, now a6. Now Svidler blundered. He should play the bishop back to e2, and I think should be a draw. Instead, he took on a6. Now, let's see what happened in the game, and then I'll return to that position. Grischuk went in for this, which looks extremely tempting. It looks like white's king is getting checked all over the place. You know, when you're short of time, this is a very attractive continuation for black. It feels like black is disturbing the coordination of white's pieces. You know, can white hold all these pieces together? For example, if you take on b2 here, then that's the end. The king has to keep hold of the rook, and then you just take on c3, and, well, good winning chances. But Svidler found an excellent move. After king d3, incredibly, white's pieces are just this sort of centralized clump, and they hold themselves together. Grischuk tried very hard to disturb white's coordination, but actually he just didn't get anywhere here at all. Svidler was absolutely rock solid. Very impressive indeed, actually. So let's see what happened. Svidler's moves actually are all to do with forming a fortress here. Let's just see the end of the game. Now, in this position, they'd reached the time control. Grischuk played f3, and they actually agreed a draw. Well, it looks like a strange position to agree a draw in at first sight, but in fact, a draw is coming very soon. For example, rook e4. Now, if black is careless, you know, it's possible that white will actually pick up this f-pawn, hide with the king on b3, and could be better here. But, well, there's a very simple way for black to draw, and that's to give back another exchange and then to to queen a pawn. Now in this position, rook and knight against queen, but you can see that white has a complete fortress. It's not going to be impossible for, well, all white's pieces are defended, so this is just a draw, and well, it won't be possible to advance this pawn. That would somehow break the coordination. Fascinating game. You could spend hours and hours just analysing that game alone. Okay, moving on. So draw there. Moving on to Gelfand against Aronian. Now, Aronian had been a bit casual in this game, and after 32 moves, we're cutting to the chase here. He's already a pawn down. Now look, that far advanced passed pawn on e7 is obviously tying the rook to e8. Black's king looks a bit exposed. White is pretty well coordinated. You know, this rook will need to come here to lend extra support to the e-pawn. So Aronian clearly in trouble. Maybe his best is to play rook d3 and go in for this endgame. And perhaps he has a chance to later on pick up this pawn, or gain counterplay on the queen side, something like this. But it's certainly not easy. But instead, Aronian, a bit short of time, played h5. Unfortunately, this was a big blunder. Of course, he must have been anticipating that the bishop would retreat, but Gelfand found an excellent move, f5, very powerful indeed. If pawn takes bishop, then queen h6 check is decisive, because in this position, after queen takes, you play rook g5 and win the queen, or in this case, bishop takes, you have rook g5, and then you win the queen that way. So in this position, oh, well, what else? We've got pawn takes, then rook takes f5, and you can see lots of things are en prise, and, well, the king looks too exposed. So Aronian played king g7, but after taking here, now Gelfand is 2 pawns up, and with the black king exposed, this is pretty hopeless. Even in the endgame, black has trouble here, even though Aronian managed to pick up 1 pawn. Let me just go right to near the end of the game. This position, so Gelfand has played steadily, starting to advance his pawns up the board, still has the pawn on e7, tying the rook down to e8. Here, Gelfand played rook f4 check, and this puts the question to the king. It's a tricky decision. Well, black is lost here. If the king retreats, then rook f7 is a strong move, and basically black is close to getting mated here. Let's just have a look what happens. So rook e4, we give a check, and now king f3 is a very beautiful move. And after this, g4 is actually a winning move. The threat is to play, well, there's no defense here. Let me play a random move, rook h1. You can, let me see, you give a check. And if king here, then of course we take the rook. And if king here, then I give a check. So that forces king here. Then we play g5 check. Exactly. So the king moves up, and then we can take the rook. So going back to this position, after rook f4 check, king g6 loses. So Aronian played king e6, but now you can see the king is cut. The black king cannot move past the line of this rook, and so Gelfand was simply able to advance his h-pawn. He allowed Aronian to take on e7, but that king cannot cross this line, and it's actually a very, very simple win for white indeed. These were the final moves of the game. Nothing for black to do, and of course the counterplay on the queen side is just too slow. And here Gelfand resigned, Aronian resigned, Gelfand won. If king e6, just g4 to protect, and then h7, and well, you can even go with the king, but rook h5 will also win the game, shielding the pawn. So a really convincing win by Gelfand. In the remaining game, Ivanchuk, he's back, managed to defeat Radyobov in an absolutely beautiful positional game. If you want to see the value of centre pawns, then that is a wonderful game. It would take me about 3 hours to go through all of that, so I'm sorry, no time now. So, scores after 9 rounds. Carlsen is in the sole lead with 6 out of 9. Then Aronian 5.5. Kramnik 5 points. Grischuk and Gelfand 4.5. Svidler 4. Ivanchuk 3.5. Radyabov 3. It's a rest day tomorrow. I think the players need it.